Some bacteria are more or less permanent residents, they form long-lasting colonies. Others are transient, but even the ones just passing through have important effects. Transient bacteria travel through the human digestive tract and, depending upon their type and unique characteristics, they have their say in the overall health of the body. But rather than take up permanent residence, they establish small colonies for brief periods of time before being excreted or dying off. In their temporary residence, however, they perform a large number of needed tasks. Some of the substances they produce are critical to the health and wellness of the residential bacteria, and, in turn, of us. Now discussion on topic, titled, The Ultimate Brain Maker. Although having a full understanding of the gut-brain connection demands a working knowledge of immunology, pathology, neurology, and endocrinology, I'm going to simplify it for you here. You will continue to build and reinforce this knowledge base as you read upcoming chapters. Think of the last time you felt sick to your stomach because you were nervous, anxious, scared, or perhaps over the moon elated. Maybe it was before taking an important test, speaking before a group of people, or getting married. Scientists are just learning that the intimate relationship between your gut and brain is actually bidirectional. Just as your brain can send butterflies to your stomach, your gut can relay its state of calm or alarm to the nervous system. The vagus nerve, the longest of the 12 cranial nerves, is the primary channel of information between the hundreds of millions of nerve cells in our intestinal nervous system and our central nervous system. Also known as cranial nerve X, it extends from the brainstem to the abdomen, directing many bodily processes that we don't consciously control. These include such important tasks as maintaining the heart rate and controlling digestion. And it turns out that the population of bacteria in the gut directly affects the stimulation and function of the cells along the vagus nerve. Some of the gut's microbes can actually release chemical messengers, just as our neurons do, that speak to the brain in their own language through the vagus nerve. When you think of your nervous system, you probably picture your brain and spinal cord. But that's just the central nervous system. You must also consider your intestinal or enteric nervous system, the one that's intrinsic to the gastrointestinal tract. The central and enteric nervous systems are created from the same tissue during fetal development, and they are connected via the vagus nerve. Vagus means wanderer, an apt name for this nerve, which wanders through the digestive system. The word vagabond comes from the same root. The neurons in the gut are so innumerable that many scientists are now calling the totality of them the second brain. Not only is this second brain regulating muscles, immune cells, and hormones, but it's also manufacturing something really important. Popular antidepressants like Paxil, Zoloft, and Lexapro increase the availability of the feel-good chemical serotonin in the brain. You may be surprised to find out that an estimated 80 to 90% of the amount of serotonin in your body is manufactured by the nerve cells in your gut. In fact, your gut's brain makes more serotonin, the master happiness molecule, than the brain in your head does. Many neurologists and psychiatrists are now realizing that this may be one reason why antidepressants are often less effective in treating depression than dietary changes are. In fact, recent research is revealing that our second brain may not be second at all. It can act independently from the main brain and control many functions without the brain's input or help. I'll explain more about the gut-brain's biology throughout the book. You'll learn about many biological functions in the upcoming chapters that all involve the microbiome. While some may seem wildly different from others, for example, what your immune cells are doing and how much insulin your pancreas is pumping out, you'll soon understand that they have the same common denominator, the gut's inhabitants. In many ways, they are your body's gatekeepers and rulers. They form your body's headquarters. They are the unsung heroes and partners in your health. And they are orchestrators of your physiology in ways you probably never imagined. In connecting the dots from the gut to the brain, it helps to consider the body's general response to stress, both physical, for example, running from an armed intruder in your house, and mental, for example, avoiding an argument with your boss. Unfortunately, the body isn't clever enough to distinguish between the two, which is why your heart can pound just as hard before you prepare to run away from a burglar as when you're walking into your boss's office. Both scenarios are perceived as stress on the body, even though only one, escaping the intruder, is a real threat to survival. So, in both instances your body will flood with natural steroids and adrenaline, and your immune system will release chemical messengers called inflammatory cytokines that send the system into high alert. This works well for episodic moments of duress, but what happens when the body is constantly under stress or thinks it is? Rarely do we find ourselves constantly running from a burglar, but physical stress also includes encounters with potentially deadly toxins and pathogens. And these we may face daily through our dietary choices alone. Although the body may not necessarily go into fight or flight mode with a pounding heart when it meets a substance or ingredient it doesn't like, it most definitely will experience an immune response. And chronic immune activation and resulting inflammation from such encounters can lead to chronic disease, from heart and brain diseases like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, depression, and dementia to autoimmune disorders, ulcerative colitis, and cancer. We'll explore this process in more detail in the next chapter, but understand for now that all manner of disease is rooted in inflammation run amok, and your immune system controls inflammation. How does the microbiome come into play? It regulates or manages the immune response. So, it, in turn, takes part in the story of inflammation in your body. Let me break this down a bit more for you. Although each of us is under constant threat from injurious chemicals and germs, we have a great defense system, immunity. When the immune system is compromised, we quickly fall prey to any number of possible disease-causing agents. Without an adequately functioning immune system, an event as simple as a mosquito bite could conceivably prove fatal. And beyond extrinsic events like insect bites, every part of us is colonized moment to moment by any number of potentially life-threatening organisms that, were it not for an appropriately functioning immune system, could easily render our death. At the same time, it is important to recognize that the immune system functions optimally when it is in balance. An overactive immune system can lead to such complications as allergies. In a severe case, it can react so wildly that it leads to anaphylactic shock, an extreme reaction that can be deadly. In addition, when the immune system is misdirected, it may fail to recognize normal body proteins as being part of the self and rebel against them. This is the basic mechanism of autoimmune diseases, which are generally treated with aggressive immune-suppressing drugs that often have significant downsides, not the least of which includes changing the array of bacteria in the gut. The immune system is to blame when a transplant patient rejects what is supposed to be a life-saving organ. And it is the immune system that helps the body recognize and eliminate cancerous cells, a process that's occurring right now inside you. Your gut has its own immune system, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue GALT. It represents 70 to 80% of your body's total immune system. This speaks volumes about the importance, and vulnerability, of your gut. If the events that take place in the gut weren't so critical to life, then the majority of your immune system wouldn't have to be there to guard and protect it. The reason most of your immune system is deployed in your gut is simple: the intestinal wall is the border with the outside world. Aside from skin, it's where your body has the most chances of encountering foreign material and organisms. And it is in constant communication with every other immune system cell in the body. If it meets a problematic substance in the gut, it alerts the rest of the immune system to be on guard. One of the overarching themes you'll read throughout the book is the importance of retaining the integrity of that delicate intestinal wall, which is only one cell thick. It must remain intact while acting as a conduit for signals between the gut bacteria and the immune system's cells right on the other side. In the words of Dr. Alessio Fasano of Harvard, who lectured on the topic at a 2014 conference, which I attended, that was dedicated solely to the science of the microbiome, these immune cells that receive signals from the gut bacteria are the body's first responders. In turn, the gut bacteria help keep the immune system vigilant but not in full defense mode. They monitor and educate the immune system. This ultimately helps prevent your gut's immune system from inappropriately reacting to foods and triggering autoimmune responses. We'll see in upcoming chapters just how critical the gut-associated lymphatic tissue is in preserving your body's overall health. It's your body's military, on the lookout for any threats coming down the intestinal pipeline that can adversely impact the body all the way up to the brain. Both human and animal studies show that bad or pathogenic gut bacteria can cause disease, but not just because they are associated with a specific condition. We know that Helicobacter pylori, for instance, is responsible for creating ulcers. But it turns out that pathogenic bacteria also interact with the immune system in the gut to cause the release of inflammatory molecules and stress hormones, essentially flipping the switch on our body's stress response system so it thinks we're being preyed upon by a lion. New science is also revealing that bad bacteria can change how we perceive pain. Indeed, people with an unhealthy microbiome may be more sensitive to pain. Good bacteria in the gut do the opposite. They try to minimize the amount and effects of the bad guys while also interacting positively with both the immune and endocrine systems. That is to say, the good bacteria can turn off that chronic immune system response. They can also help keep in check cortisol and adrenaline, the two hormones associated with stress that can wreak havoc on the body when they are continually flowing. Each large group of gut bacteria has many different strains, and each of these strains may have different effects. The two most common groups of organisms in the gut, representing more than 90% of the bacterial population in the colon, are Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. Firmicutes are notorious as fat-loving bacteria, for it's been shown that the bacteria in the Firmicutes family are equipped with more enzymes to digest complex carbohydrates, so they are much more efficient at extracting energy, i.e., calories from food. They also were just recently found to be instrumental in increasing fat absorption. Researchers have discovered that obese people have elevated levels of Firmicutes in their gut flora, compared to lean people, who are dominated more by Bacteroidetes. In fact, the relative proportion of these two groups to each other, the Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes ratio, is critical for determining health and risk for illness. What's more, we've just learned that higher levels of Firmicutes actually turn on genes that increase the risk for obesity, diabetes, and even cardiovascular disease. Think of that, changes in the ratio of these bacteria can change the actual expression of your DNA. The two most studied strains of bacteria today are those of Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus. Don't worry about having to remember these long names. In this book, you'll be hearing about many types of bacteria that have complicated Latin names, but I promise that by the end you'll be able to distinguish among many different strains. Although we can't say for sure yet exactly which strains and which proportions are ideal for optimal health, the general thinking is that variety is key. I should also point out that the line between good and bad bacteria isn't as clear as you might assume. Again, overall diversity and the ratios of strains relative to one another are the important factors. In the wrong ratio, certain strains that can have positive effects on health can turn into villains. The notorious bacteria Escherichia coli, for instance, produces vitamin K but can cause severe illness. Helicobacter pylori, the bacteria I just mentioned that causes peptic ulcers, also helps regulate appetite in a positive way so you don't overeat. For one more example, consider Clostridium difficile, a strain of bacteria that can lead to a life-endangering infection if it's allowed to overgrow. The illness, characterized by intense diarrhea, still kills approximately 14,000 Americans each year. C. difficile infections have risen sharply over the last 20 years. Between 1993 and 2005, the number of cases among hospitalized adults tripled. Between 2001 and 2005, it more than doubled. Mortality rates have also soared, largely due to the emergence of a mutant, hypervirulent strain. Normally, all of us as babies had intestines that were colonized with generous amounts of the C. difficile bacterium, and it caused no problem. It's found in the intestines of up to 63% of newborns and even a third of toddlers. But a change in the gut environment, for example through overuse of certain antibiotics, can spur excessive growth of this bacteria, resulting in a life-threatening illness. The good news is that we now have a very effective way to treat such an infection, through the use of other strains of bacteria to restore balance. You'll learn more about the microbiome and its relationship with the immune system and brain in the upcoming chapters, but this is a good time to jump to the following question: where do our brotherly bugs originate? In other words, how do they become a part of us? Now discussion on topic, titled, Baby You're Born with IT. Sort of. Much of what we know about the microbiome comes from studying so-called germ-free mice. These are mice that have been altered to not have any gut bacteria, thereby allowing scientists to study the effects of missing microbes or, conversely, exposing them to certain strains and watching what happens. Germ-free lab rats have been shown, for example, to have acute anxiety, an inability to handle stress, chronic gut and general inflammation, and lower levels of an important brain growth hormone called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. But these symptoms can be reversed once the rats are fed a diet rich in Lactobacillus helveticus or Bifidobacterium longum, two common probiotics. It is thought that each of us was once germ-free, when we were in our mother's womb, a relatively sterile environment. I expect this notion to be challenged very soon, for new science is just emerging that suggests the fetus may be exposed to microbes in utero through the placenta, and that the microbiome actually begins there. Stay tuned for more definitive studies on this subject. The current thinking is that the moment we move through the birth canal and are exposed to organisms in the vagina, our microbiome begins to develop. And while people may not want to picture this in their minds, even the mother's fecal material in the perianal area helps to inoculate the newborn with health-sustaining microorganisms. In terms of the initial development of a healthy immune system, a significant factor in establishing the set point for inflammation may be an individual's method of birth. It's one of the most influential events in determining the functional outcome of the microbiome. By set point, I am referring to the body's average or baseline level of inflammation. It helps to think of your set point as a built-in thermostat that is programmed to a particular temperature. If your set point is high, such as a thermostat fixed at 78 degrees, overall your general level of inflammation is higher than someone whose set point is lower. Even though there may be some variations, overall a higher set point means a higher degree of temperature inflammation. And as I just mentioned, how you were born affects how your microbiome developed initially, which in turn influenced your innate set point for inflammation. Can you change your set point? Yes, absolutely. Just as you can change your set point for body weight and body mass index (BMI) through diet and exercise, you can change your set point for inflammation through basic lifestyle interventions. But before we get to all that, it's important for you to appreciate the power of early life experiences, and how method of birth shapes health risks in a person's life. Multiple high-profile studies have compared the difference between children born via C-section and those born vaginally. In addition to comparing dominant characteristics of these two groups' microbiomes, they've examined the associated health implications and reached many alarming conclusions. These studies have shown that there's a clear correlation between what colonizes a baby's intestines and what is found in the mother's birth canal. One particularly fascinating study performed by a team of researchers in 2010 revealed that when they used gene sequencing to profile bacterial types from mothers and their newborn babies, they found that infants born vaginally obtain bacterial colonies resembling their own mother's vaginal microbiome, dominated by beneficial lactobacillus, whereas babies born via C-section acquired colonies similar to those found on the skin's surface, dominated by an abundance of the potentially harmful Staphylococcus. In 2013, the Canadian Medical Association Journal included a study that stated the facts bluntly, showing how disruption of the infant's gut microbiota has been linked to many inflammatory and immune problems like allergies, asthma, and even cancer. These researchers highlighted the impact of a baby's birth experience and whether he or she is breastfed or placed on formula. They rightfully referred to the gut microbiota as a superorgan with diverse roles in health and disease. In related commentary about the study, Dr. Rob Knight of the esteemed Knight Lab at the University of Colorado, Boulder, said, "Children born by cesarean delivery or fed with formula may be at increased risk of a variety of conditions later in life. Both processes alter the gut microbiota in healthy infants, which could be the mechanism for the increased risk." What makes lactobacillus so superior is that it creates a slightly acidic environment, which reduces the growth of potentially dangerous bacteria. Lactobacillus bacteria are able to utilize milk sugar, or lactose, as a fuel. This enables babies to use lactose from their mother's milk. By and large, infants born by cesarean section may not receive an abundant supply of lactobacillus. Instead, they are exposed more to what's lurking around the operating room and on the doctor's and nurse's hands, skin bacteria that tend to be dominated by types that don't impart many benefits. Moreover, as Dr. Martin Blaser describes in his terrific book, Missing Microbes, every single woman in America receives antibiotics when giving birth by C-section, and that means that all the infants born surgically start life exposed to a powerful antibiotic, a double whammy. Dr. Blaser, who directs New York University's microbiome program, further points out that a third of infants born in the U.S. today are born by C-section, which reflects a 50% increase since 1996. If this trend continues, by 2020 half of the babies born in the US will be delivered surgically. I love how Blaser so eloquently states the facts of the matter. The fancy names of these bacteria don't matter so much as the notion that the founding populations of microbes found on C-section infants are not those selected by hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution or even longer. Studies have also proven that vaginally born infants have much higher levels of bifidobacteria, a group of beneficial gut bacteria that help to mature the gut lining more quickly. Surgically born babies, on the other hand, lack this type of good bacteria. One way to think about the birthing process is to understand that it's like giving a newborn a set of instructions for a healthy start to life. It's the last major transmission a baby receives from its mother after being in utero. Babies who arrive via C-section are missing some of these instructions. And they may never get these exact ones back either artificially or even through breastfeeding or diet. The statistics regarding the health consequences of being born through the abdomen as opposed to the vagina are absolutely stunning. Here's a small snapshot of what being born by C-section can entail, based on a large population and rigorously controlled studies. First, a 5-fold increased risk of allergies. Second, triple the risk of ADHD. Third, twice the risk of autism. Fourth, an 80% increased risk of celiac disease. Fifth, a 50% increased risk of becoming obese as an adult and, as we'll see later, being obese is directly correlated with an increased risk of dementia. Sixth, a 70% increased risk of type 1 diabetes, and being diabetic more than doubles the risk for dementia. Let me be clear, C-sections do save lives, and they are medically necessary under certain situations. But most experts, including home birth midwives and obstetricians who specialize in high-risk births, agree that only a fraction of deliveries need to be done surgically, and yet these operations are often a choice now being made by American women. In 2014, a new nationwide study revealed that 26% of U.S. mothers delivered via C-section in 2001, and 45% of these deliveries were not considered medically indicated. So, my concerns revolve squarely around the trend in choosing to have a C-section for reasons that are not necessarily in the interest of the baby or mother. That said, a pregnant woman could have every good intention of giving birth vaginally and then face unexpected circumstances that call for a C-section. She should never feel guilty or fearful that she's jeopardizing her child's future health. Later in the book I'll provide explicit information, for both expecting mothers and those who've already given birth, on how to compensate for a surgical delivery. There's a lot you can do to support a newborn's developing microbiome and counteract potential negative effects from medical interventions taken during childbirth. Although it's logical to assume this passing on of microbes from mother to child through the birth canal is unique to mammals, we have evidence that other species do indeed pass on their microbial heritage to their offspring, albeit through different mechanisms. These other species include marine sponges, which evolved 600 million years ago as the first multicellular animals, clams, aphids, cockroaches, whiteflies, stinkbugs, chickens, and turtles. The point is that transmission of microbes from one generation to the next is a fundamental process of life. Now discussion on topic, titled, The 3 Forces Working Against Your Belly Bugs. Although you can't change how you were born, how you were initially fed, and what kind of microbiome developed in and on you as an infant, the good news is that you still have the power to change, heal, and nourish a healthy microbiome through what you eat, what you're exposed to in the environment, and what kind of lifestyle you lead. By now, you probably have a general sense of what can work against the health of your gut's good bugs. I'll detail all the potential triggers and causes of a sick microbiome later on. But as a primer, let's briefly run through the 3 strongest forces at work. Force number 1, exposure to substances that kill or otherwise adversely change the composition of the bacterial colonies. These include everything from environmental chemicals to certain ingredients in food, for example, sugar, gluten, water, for example, chlorine, and drugs like antibiotics. Force number 2, lack of nutrients that support healthy, diverse tribes of bacteria and instead favor bad bacteria. I'll share which foods and supplements ensure the health of the microbiome and, in turn, the brain. Force number 3, stress. While it may sound like a cliché to say that stress is bad for your health, I'll explain why it's even worse than we previously thought. Clearly, some of these are impossible to avoid at all times. There will be situations, for example, when antibiotics are life-saving and necessary. Later on, I'll give you some instructions for handling such situations so you can preserve the health of your gut or your child's gut, as in the case of being prescribed antibiotics for an infection during pregnancy, as much as possible. This will, in turn, help preserve the health and function of your brain. Now discussion on topic, titled, The Dirty Secret About Modern Plagues. One of the themes of this book is the power of dirt, so to speak. Put another way, there's immense value in being unhygienic. Astonishing new studies show a relationship between our increasingly sterile living environments and incidence of chronic illnesses, from heart disease and autoimmune disorders to cancer and dementia. At Stanford University's School of Medicine, husband and wife team Erica and Justin Sonnenberg run a lab in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology, where they are focusing on understanding the interactions within the intestinal microbiome and those between gut bacteria and the human host. In particular, they are investigating how a loss of microbial species and diversity in Western civilizations due to diet, use of antibiotics, and overly sanitized conditions may explain why we suffer from rising rates of Western diseases, which are not seen nearly as much in traditional, mostly agrarian societies. In a recent paper, they write convincingly that we may be experiencing an incompatibility between our DNA, which has remained relatively stable over the course of human history, and our microbiome, which has experienced dramatic changes in response to our modern lifestyles. They also highlight how our Western diets, which are low in plant fibers that serve as fuel for gut bacteria, result in fewer types of microbes and beneficial byproducts that our gut bacteria produce when they metabolize or ferment our food. We are, in their words, starving our microbial self, and this may have drastic health consequences. The byproducts, by the way, that our gut bacteria produce help control inflammation as well as our immune system's response, two key factors in all manner of chronic illness. The Sonnenbergs write, it is possible that the Western microbiota is actually dysbiotic and predisposes individuals to a variety of diseases. When you compare the microbiome of children from Africa with that of children from Europe, you find a big difference. The Western microbiome significantly lacks diversity, and has more bacteria from the group Firmicutes than the group Bacteroidetes, the two types of bacteria that dominate the gut's ecology. Firmicutes are notoriously good at helping the body extract more calories from food and aiding in the uptake of fats, hence their association with weight gain when they dominate in the gut. Bacteroidetes, on the other hand, don't have the same capacity. So, the pattern of higher levels of Firmicutes and lower levels of Bacteroidetes is associated with a greater risk of obesity. It's seen in people from urban areas, while the opposite is more common in people from rural areas. Another way of seeing the connection between a clean, low-fiber Western lifestyle and incidence of chronic illness is to consider the wealth factor. Do wealthier and cleaner nations have higher rates of, say, Alzheimer's disease? This was demonstrated in some excellent research published in 2013, which was carried out at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Molly Fox and her colleagues assessed 192 countries around the world, looking at two things. First, they examined rates of parasite infestation and diversity of gut bacteria in people from these countries. And second, they reviewed the rate of Alzheimer's disease. What they found was truly remarkable. In those countries having the least sanitation, the prevalence of Alzheimer's was dramatically reduced. But in countries with higher degrees of sanitation, and therefore lower levels of parasites as well as less diversity of intestinal organisms, Alzheimer's prevalence skyrocketed. In countries where more than 75% of people reside in urban areas, such as the United Kingdom and Australia, Alzheimer's rates were 10% higher than in countries where less than 1/10 of people live in urban areas, such as Nepal and Bangladesh. Their conclusions state, based on our analysis, it appears that hygiene is positively associated with Alzheimer's disease risk. Variation in hygiene may partly explain global patterns in Alzheimer's disease rates. Microorganism exposure may be inversely related to Alzheimer's disease risk. These results may help predict Alzheimer's disease burden in developing countries where microbial diversity is rapidly diminishing. Now, correlation like that found in this study doesn't necessarily indicate causation. Just because attention to hygiene is strongly associated with increased risk of Alzheimer's disease doesn't necessarily mean it causes Alzheimer's disease rates to rise. There are many variables at play when it comes to the development of any given disease, as well as incidence of certain illnesses in various nations. But, that said, we must acknowledge that the evidence continues to mount to the extent it makes it hard to ignore such strong and consistent correlations. It's observational, but deductive reasoning compels us to at least consider the fact that our microbiome is factoring, big time, into risk for many chronic diseases. It also forces us to ask the question that Dr. Justin Sonnenberg has posed: how much influence do bacteria have over us? Are humans simply elaborate vessels for the propagation of microbes? A good question indeed. The inescapable fact is that we have evolved with these microorganisms over millions of years. They are as much a part of our survival as our own cells are. We require them for life and health. Unfortunately, we treat the intestinal flora with disrespect. They are doing vital work under hazardous conditions. It's time to give them due regards and take care of them as they deserve. Only then will we be able to make serious, meaningful headway against our modern afflictions. Here Chapter 1 ends. Now discussion on Chapter 2, titled, Belly and Brain on Fire, the New Science of Inflammation. Knowing what I know today about the role of diet in the risk of disease and progression of an illness, I am deeply saddened when I think of my father, who was once a brilliant neurosurgeon, trained at the prestigious Leahy Clinic in Massachusetts, and who now resides in an assisted living facility located across the parking lot from my office. His brain has been ravaged by Alzheimer's disease. More often than not, he doesn't recognize me and still thinks he's practicing medicine, though he retired more than 25 years ago. I sometimes wonder, what could he have done differently to prevent this fate? What could any of my patients do to prevent this fate? The same questions go through my head as those in the families I counsel who are struggling with a tragic diagnosis in a loved one. Why did this happen? What did he or she do wrong? When did it start? Could we have averted this somehow? And then I remind myself of the key process in the body that has everything to do with brain disease: inflammation. What does inflammation have to do with the microbiome? That's what we're going to explore in this chapter. I'm going to couch this discussion within the context of Alzheimer's disease, arguably the most dreaded neurological ailment of all, which affects some 5.4 million Americans. This will help you understand the indelible connection between the state of your gut's microbial community and the fate of your brain. Now discussion on topic, titled, Boondoggle of the 21st Century. In 2014, I wrote an online article titled Why We Can and Must Focus on Preventing Alzheimer's, following an announcement in the New York Times about a new partnership forged among the NIH, 10 pharmaceutical companies, and 7 nonprofit organizations. Their mission is dedicated to developing drugs to treat Alzheimer's disease, among other illnesses. No question, this 5-year, $230 million effort seems noble at first, but I declared, the ultimate motivation for this seemingly ecumenical event is suspect. Alzheimer's disease is expensive. The $200 billion annual price tag I mentioned in the introduction doesn't include the emotional expense borne by family members whose lives are somberly compromised by this disease, sometimes for a long time. As the Times article divulged, drug companies have invested staggering amounts of money in developing drugs to treat Alzheimer's disease, for example, but again and again the medications have failed in testing. That same year, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that 2 of the promising drug candidates for treating Alzheimer's disease had failed to provide any meaningful benefit. Adding to this disturbing report came another published in the Journal of the American Medical Association showing that the drug memantine, currently approved by the Food and Drug Administration (FDA) for treating moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, was not only ineffective but also associated with more decline in patients' functionality when compared to a placebo. The reason we should temper our support for this collaboration is that it represents a perversion of priority. As I wrote in the article, Those who would be most enthusiastic about these seemingly forthright liaisons and monetary expenditures may be focused on the development of a blockbuster magic bullet for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease for reasons that are less invested in alleviating suffering and more invested in financial outcome. Harsh, I know. But I meant it to be a clarion call to switch gears and explore another option. Rather than paying so much attention and money to developing treatments for Alzheimer's disease or any neurodegenerative ailment, for that matter, we must focus on educating people about preventive efforts. These preventive strategies are already well documented in high-profile scientific literature and can have a radical impact in reducing the incidences of the neurodegenerative illness. Medical researchers already have knowledge that, if implemented, could slash the number of new Alzheimer's patients here in the US by more than half. And when you consider that the number of people stricken with Alzheimer's is predicted to double by the year 2030, spreading the word about this information should be top priority. Economic and marketplace realities unfortunately are formidable barriers to overcome. Few, if any, opportunities exist to monetize such non-proprietary interventions like diet and exercise, which, among other lifestyle strategies, are well known to play important roles in both brain degeneration and, on the other hand, preservation. Here's one fine example of a major lifestyle factor. Our best medical journals are now brimming with high-profile, rigorous studies that show a stunning correlation between high blood sugar and risk for dementia. As reported in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013, even slight elevations of blood sugar that are far below the diabetes range have been shown to significantly increase the risk for the development of untreatable dementia. Researchers from the University of Washington evaluated a group of more than 2,000 individuals whose average age was 76 years. At the beginning of the study, they measured their fasting blood sugar levels, and then followed these individuals for about 7 years. Some of the people developed dementia over that time period. What the researchers discovered was that there was a direct correlation between blood sugar levels at the start of the study and risk for developing dementia. It's important to understand that these individuals were not diabetic, they had blood sugar levels well below the threshold for a diagnosis of diabetes. Blood sugar directly reflects dietary choices. Eat too many refined sugars and carbs and you'll have a hard time controlling your blood sugar. I'll describe the link between blood sugar balance and risk for dementia shortly, but suffice it to say this kind of knowledge provides a significant leverage point that can move the needle on cognitive health. Further, in 2013 the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery and Psychiatry published a study showing that elderly people who added more fat, in the form of olive oil or mixed nuts, to their diets maintained their cognitive function much better over a 6-year period than people who ate a low-fat diet. The potential implications of studies like these are poised to revolutionize medicine as we know it. But sadly, disease prevention through non-invasive, simple daily lifestyle choices lacks the seeming heroism of bold, pharmaceutical-based interventions. It's time that we take a new road and champion preventive medicine, especially for brain health. We can afford to do no less. Rather than expending huge resources to find the cow after the barn door has been left open, maybe we should see about keeping the barn door closed in the first place. And that metaphorical barn door has a lot to do with the state of your microbiome. To understand this connection, let's first explore the role of inflammation, then circle back to the underlying power of your gut bacteria. Now discussion on topic, titled, Inflammation, the Common Denominator. We are all familiar with inflammation. The word itself comes from the Latin verb inflammare, which means to kindle or to set on fire. Inflamed flesh is burning up, and not in a good way. An inflammatory cascade might include the redness, heat, and swelling that accompanies an insect bite or the pain you experience with a sore throat or sprained ankle. We generally accept the notion that a bite or scrape to the skin is going to be painful because of inflammation. But inflammation is involved in far more disease processes than you can possibly imagine. Indeed, it is the crux of the body's healing response, bringing more immune activity to a place of injury or infection. But when inflammation persists or serves no purpose, deep inside the body and through systemic pathways, it causes illness. In fact, it's implicated in such diverse conditions as obesity, diabetes, cancer, depression, autism, asthma, arthritis, coronary artery disease, multiple sclerosis, and even Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. Let's look at Alzheimer's in particular. Inflammation is exactly what is happening in the brain of a patient with Alzheimer's disease. This inflammation may be difficult to spot, I realize, because when the brain is inflamed we don't see what we think of as the normal signs of inflammation, such as pain and swelling. The brain, although able to perceive pain anywhere in the body, doesn't itself have pain receptors and therefore cannot register the fact that it's up in smoke. Nonetheless, scientific research has, for the past several decades, clearly demonstrated over and over again that inflammation is a fundamental process that underlies the development of Alzheimer's disease. A multitude of biochemicals are related to inflammation both in the brain and throughout the body. In Alzheimer's patients,